Hello and welcome to Nutshell Recaps. This video explains the synopsis of the movie, A Dangerous Method. Warning, there will be spoilers, so proceed with caution. Don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button, it will really help our channel grow. A mentally unstable woman named Sabina Spielrein is first introduced to us in the first scene. She gets upset and agitated about the tiniest things easily. As a result, in 1904, she is taken to Bergholzli, a prominent mental health facility in Zurich, Switzerland. Later, it is discovered that Sabina has been identified as having a typical case of hysteria, and that she will begin treatment under the supervision of Swiss physician Carl Jung. Dr. Carl stands behind Sabina during their first conversation and observes her stammering, which indicates she has trouble answering questions. The following morning, Carl and Sabina go for a stroll in the woods, and while there, he learns that she has a remarkable talent, the capacity to foresee others' words before they are spoken. When questioned about it, Sabina asserts that she has an inner angel who speaks to her in German and assists her in making predictions. When she tells Dr. Carl this, he thinks that her gift would be useful for pursuing a career in medicine, which is what she aspires to do. Dr. Carl picks up Sabina's coat off the floor as they are still talking and uses his walking stick to dust it off. Unexpectedly, Sabina becomes enraged by this, and she aggressively urges him to stop. Carl discovers a few days later that Sabina is truly a smart woman with a medical degree. She is given the chance to help him with his experiments once he recognizes her intelligence and vitality. Sabina accepts without hesitation because she can't believe she will be working with such a well-known scientist. The focus then changes to Emma, Carl's wife, who has just had a stunning baby girl. Carl, who shares the same excitement, goes to the delivery room to view his child. He observes his wife's disappointment, though, as she had planned to birth a boy as she had promised. Carl comforts Emma in response and tells her not to think such crazy things. In the middle of these things, Carl and Sabina resume their conversations in which he reveals the underlying reason for her condition. He reveals that Sabina's issues began when her violent father made her feel inferior. He used to spank her on the bum and make her lick his hands as punishment. In fact, this inflamed Sabina, who started looking for any opportunity for humiliation. She had been excited even by Carl earlier slapping her coat with his walking stick. With this important information, Dr. Carl sets up a meeting with renowned Austrian doctor Dr. Sigmund Freud to discuss their patients and establish the best course for their recovery. The doctors' talk develops into a protracted exchange that lasts for 13 continuous hours as they start to express their opinions and analyze one another. The boys resolve to meet up right away despite their lack of fatigue. Later, when Carl runs into Sabina, he tells her about his discussion with Dr. Freud. As their chat progresses, the two learn that they have a lot in common and grow closer. One day, Dr. Freud has to go on an urgent business trip, so he writes a letter to Carl, requesting him to look after a patient named Dr. Otto Groves, an unstable psychoanalyst known for his brilliance and womanizing tendencies. In the letter, Dr. Freud provides all the details about Otto, including the peculiar fact that he resorts to biting when he becomes angry. For the sake of their friendship, Carl obliges without any hesitation. He then attends a session with Otto, hoping to use his therapeutic talking method to help the patient. During this, Otto reveals his lustful nature, boasting about his numerous mistresses and the children he has fathered with them. Additionally, he suggests to Carl having extramarital affairs. Otto believes that having several relationships keeps one happy and healthy, but having just one might be stressful. The next day, Sabina actively helps Carl with his research and even makes some jokes to keep him entertained. In fact, she has begun to get better from her mental illness. Carl, on the other hand, thinks back to what Otto said. He finds himself staring at Sabina for a while, but he somehow manages to restrain his irrational behavior. Carl meets with Otto for another therapy session that evening. The latter queries whether he has ever had sexual encounters with his patients. Carl asks Otto the same inquiry and receives a negative response. Otto responds by admitting that he tricks his patients into believing that their desire to avoid having sex with him is a disease. He employs this method on every woman he encounters, and it almost always has positive results. Otto brags about having sexual relations with more than 100 women. The following morning, Carl joins Sabina at a park where they start chatting about sex. Sabina admits that she has never engaged in sexual activity, implying that this may be a factor in her emotions of worry and despair. She therefore wants to have this experience as soon as possible. Sabina takes the initiative and gives the doctor an unexpected kiss while he hesitates. Later that night, she extends an invitation to Carl so they can engage in passionate physical contact there. Otto pushes Carl to give in and have sex with Sabina later on in the therapy session. He should get it to her since she wants it. Carl, however, is steadfast in his choice. He recognizes the taboo of getting connected with a patient while also not wanting to betray his wife. Carl's willpower begins to erode nevertheless as Otto persuades him to continue recounting some of his amorous adventures. When the wild Otto claps a worker in the open field, he finally gives in to his cravings. Carl rushes to Sabina's house out of desperation and ends up having a sexual encounter with her. This is the start of their relationship, and as it progresses, they perform increasingly strenuous activities, including bondage and spanking. Emma knows Carl has always desired a boat, so one day she gives it to him as a surprise. The boat has red sails. She says that she thinks he is the best man in the world and that he deserves to have anything he wants. Carl understands that he is betraying his wife after seeing how much she loves and trusts him. He then pays Sabina a visit at her house and admits that they should call an end to their relationship right away. She convinces him to stay with her nonetheless, pleading with him to discipline her the same way her father did. In the following scene, Dr. Freud meets with Carl after his return from the business trip to continue their conversation about their respective philosophies of psychoanalysis. But their disagreements are regular, which puts a strain on their connection. A rumor that Carl has taken one of his patients as his mistress and is carrying a coitus with her is brought up by Freud as the conversation begins to heat up. The latter, though, vehemently refutes the charge. He says he is just keeping a close eye on the woman. After the conference is over, Carl decides he can no longer keep his relationship with Sabina a secret and breaks it off, leaving her devastated and sad. A few days later, a furious Sabina charges Carl with telling her mother about their relationship and goes into his office. She refers to him as a fool and a betrayer. Carl replies that her mother was already aware of the relationship because of a letter she had received that was signed anonymously. Sabina is told that he will no longer treat her as a friend and will only treat her as his patient. This further enrages Sabina, who then storms out after grabbing a knife and cutting Carl's face. Later, she writes a letter to Dr. Freud asking for a meeting to talk about her relationship with Carl. Freud writes to Carl after reading her letter to ask about the situation's veracity, but Carl replies that he had nothing to do with it. By circulating untrue rumors about him, he claims Sabina is genuinely attempting to ruin his life. Freud immediately accepts it because of their strong friendship, and he writes a letter to Sabina. He mentions that he is currently too busy with work to meet her, therefore he can't. Freud advises them to tackle their problems on their own as well. The situation overwhelms Sabina, who returns to Carl's office only to find that he is leaving the hospital. It turns out that he is going to the US to attend a significant conference. Sabina is enraged and chastises Carl for lying to Freud about their relationship. She demands that he tell the truth about their relationship in a letter to Freud. Carl is further reminded by Sabina that she had the option of publicly damaging his reputation but decided not to. After hearing all of this, Carl eventually complies and writes his Austrian friend a letter outlining the entire scope of the reality. Freud reads the letter and feels betrayed, but he is not startled. He merely apologizes in writing to Sabina and expresses admiration for how she handled the situation. A few years later, Sabina visits Carl's home in Switzerland to work with him on her dissertation. The scene then jumps to Sabina at that time. They are reminded of their passionate past while they labored together when they had sex in places like Carl's bedroom, the mental hospital, and even the boat. They therefore decide to have a coitus to add yet more memory to the collection. After that, Sabina talks about choosing to move to Vienna rather than Zurich after receiving her diploma. Carl becomes upset by this and begs her not to leave, but Sabina is adamant about going. After 2 more years, Sabina is a licensed psychiatrist and travels to Vienna to meet Freud. Sabina declares her support for Freud during their discussion about psychoanalysis, but she also stresses the necessity of the two of them getting along in order for psychoanalysis to advance. But it doesn't seem like Freud wants to make things right with Carl. They are no longer even willing to see each other in the face due to their growing distance. Sabina pays Emma a visit at her home a year later. Sabina is currently married to a Russian doctor and is expecting a child. The couple has stated that they would like a girl. Emma explains that Carl's mental condition has gotten worse after he severed ties with Freud as they converse. She then begs Sabina to speak with him. Carl, on the other hand, is seen sitting comfortably by a tranquil river. It is made clear that he has stopped working on his studies and has become distant from it. Soon after, Sabina comes up to him and strikes up a chat. Carl admits that his end-of-the-world nightmares have been keeping him up. He occasionally witnesses a massive flood that is capable of wiping out the entire world as it ravages the city. Sabina swiftly changes the subject after deciding that the talk is dull and lets him know that she and her husband are going back to Russia. She then asks Carl about his new mistress, and he tells her that her name is Tony and that she looks a lot like Sabina. He claims that Tony makes him think of the enjoyable times he had with Sabina. Carl further realizes that his love for Sabina has helped him grow as a person, but he also understands that there is nothing he can do to make things different. Karl is still immersed in his thoughts when Sabina departs the conversation and boards a carriage to leave the city. The four experts' fates are revealed in the concluding remarks of the movie. Otto tragically perished from malnutrition in Berlin in 1920, it is claimed. In 1939, Freud succumbed to cancer in London after the Nazis had driven him from Vienna. The Nazis shot Sabina and her two daughters in 1942, and she had educated many analysts in the Soviet Union. This was a terrible fate for her and her daughters. Before his passing in 1961, Karl had recovered from a psychological breakdown and had become known as the world's leading psychologist.